What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy Malik Washington. How you all doing this fine day or evening, wherever you all reside? I hope that all is well with you all and everything that you do. I don't know why I can't speak. I don't know. I'm getting a little tongue tied here for whatever the reason. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Today, I want to recap, but also go over I guess you could say, a statement that was made by the celebrity slash actor herself, Jada Pinkett Smith. You can consider this video a continuation of part of a previous video I did about maybe 2 or 3 videos back that was in regards to the Netflix series, documentary series, Cleopatra. For those of you who do not know that video, you can go back and watch it yourself. I can recap on it just a little bit on here, and then for the most part, you can go and watch it yourself about what I gave as far as my perspective is concerned in regards to this whole debacle and controversy surrounding Cleopatra's skin color, her image, her visage, where she derived from, who her ancestors were, you name it. But in short, basically, I did a video because there had been controversy surrounding the documentary series Cleopatra. Cleopatra, as you all know, was a woman that had ruled Egypt around 51 BC. She was born in Alexandria, Egypt, which is a port city in Egypt, that was taken and named after the conqueror, the Macedonian conqueror, Alexander the Great, along with his commanding officer, Ptolemy. And basically, Ptolemy and Alexander come from a long line of Macedonians back in Greece. And Cleopatra is a part of that long line of descendants who actually descend from Greece itself. But she just so happened to be born in the land of Egypt. It has been speculated that Cleopatra VII is not only just of Greek Macedonian descent, but it has also been suggested that her mother is of non-Grecian descent. Some have argued, of course, that due to inbreeding, and that inbreeding was practiced amongst obviously certain aristocracies, is, Europe, that was always a big proponent of theirs, amongst the bourgeois class, if you will. Many of them have a tendency to keep it in the family, as we would all like to put it in simpler terms or layman terms. This inbreeding was a common practice. And so as a result of that, it has been suggested by that logic that, well, it would make sense that her mother would perhaps be someone who was of Ptolemy's line or in the family. Regardless of what it is, it has been suggested that perhaps outside of that, she may have been something other than just a Greek Macedonian. Some had suggested for the mother that was proposed to be her mother, which is a different Cleopatra. They said that she was of Persian and Syrian descent. But again, that's just pure speculation. I'm not putting a definitive on it to say that it is the case, but I'm just throwing to you all what's out there and what has already been currently speculated about her. But as far as what we go off of as the overarching point about Cleopatra is that we know her to be a Macedonian Greek woman. But where the problem comes in at is that you have people who come from the pro-black slash Afrocentrist communities who have suggested otherwise, that Cleopatra was in fact a quote unquote black woman, simply because of the fact that, well, prior to Arab conquest under General Amir, and I want to say 639 BC, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, Cleopatra lived way prior to the Arab conquest. As a result of this, indigenous Egyptians did dwell in Egypt prior to their being there. And it has been suggested that if Cleopatra's mother is of non-Greek ancestry, then there is the possibility that she could have been an indigenous Egyptian. And it has been presumed that because she's indigenous, that she might have been an African, or in their eyes, a dark-skinned woman. Someone who is of Egypt, but she's dark-skinned, right? So with that being said, in this documentary, it has been suggested, and we all have been taught this in the black community to some degree. It had been rumored and stated that Cleopatra was a black woman. As you would have heard, if you all have watched it, you know what was stated, right? But if you haven't, there was like a couple of people that were saying like, oh, she looks like me. She has my skin color, my hair texture. Another woman said that that her mother or her grandmother told her that she doesn't care what the books or the schools tell you. Cleopatra was a black woman, which was a complete proclamation, a false proclamation of what she really does not know about Egypt. Because making the case that Egypt is black, and I've said this in my previous video, you cannot say that Egypt is completely black because it simply isn't. Egypt has never been black, has not been black for quite a long time. And if you want to make the case that there are black people in Egypt, no one would argue with you that there weren't any black people. There are black people there today. Matter of fact, the Sudanese people live in southern Egypt, which they would have considered back then to be known as the Nubians. They were also the groups of they were the group of black people who at one point in time did rule Egypt, I think for around 80 to 100 years or better. But they ruled for a bit of time, right? Not so long, but enough to make some degree of an impact there. Nonetheless, Egypt has been through so many invasions and conquests and things like that. You cannot just simply say that Egypt was black. And even if hypothetically, we're not saying, again, for those of you who are listening, please listen carefully. I am not saying that Cleopatra is an Egyptian. I am not saying that Cleopatra is non-Greek. Not saying none of that at all. But we're talking about a hypothetical here. If her mother was of non-Greek ancestry, right? And it is assumed that she was an indigenous Egyptian. This group of Afrocentrists believes that she could have been a dark-skinned woman. Now, the problem with that logic is, if she was an indigenous Egyptian, which country did she come from? Because she might not have been from a long line of Egyptians. She might have actually came from a different country. Because the case that pro-blacks make is, well, Arabs weren't there prior, so she had to be black. But that's just going from one extreme to the next, because even prior to Arab conquest, under Cleopatra, there were other groups involved during that period. You're not just talking about Arabs. You're talking about Greeks themselves, Romans, Nubians, some other civilizations as well that had dwelt there. But it wasn't just Egypt wasn't just indigenous or homogeneous in and of itself. They had multiple cultures within that indigenous culture. So you cannot just simply say, oh, this woman was a dark-skinned woman. And we have seen plenty of coinage as well as busts that were made by the Romans of that period, how they had perceived Cleopatra. She was not perceived as this, you could say, Afrocentric woman. She hardly had any Afrocentric features at all. Some would make the argument, well, if you look at some reliefs, some have compared her to Isis. And when you look at some of those images of her through the Egyptian reliefs, she doesn't look like a European. She looks like an Egyptian. Right. But Egyptians come in different colors, shapes, and sizes. That does not mean that she was black. Doesn't mean she looks like a West African, if you want to call it that, or one of the Central African countries. She didn't look like them per se. Egyptians tend to have their own distinct look. And of course, yes, you have dark-skinned people that lived in Egypt, but I don't believe that she was one of those dark-skinned people, if you will. Can you make the case that perhaps she was fair-skinned? Definitely. A lot of Macedonians were fair-skinned, but you also had Macedonians who were flush-skinned as well. But she definitely wasn't dark-skinned in that respect. And so that was basically what I was talking about in that particular video. Now, to forward it to right now, recently, Jada Pinkett Smith came out in a statement and she made the proclamation that white supremacy had to do with her show flopping and having a 1% approval rating. Because, and again, This is not due to the fact that white supremacy was even involved in any way, shape, or form. It's just funny to me how every time when a black person decides to do something because they have this ideology and they want their ideology to supersede everyone else's, that if people disagree, if people feel like you're historically inaccurate, if people come out and they have an antithesis against what you're saying, that you somehow, some way have to shut down the conversation by saying that these people who disagree with me, who don't like what I'm doing, don't like the fact that I'm making money off of inaccuracies, are white supremacists, are racist, are bigots, and don't want black people to succeed, and they are whitewashing our history. First off, okay. So first off, you have to consider this, right? Let's go off of your logic that Cleopatra was a black woman. Let's say that her mother, let's say it came out. Let's say it was true. She was of Nubian descent and she was dark. She was darker skinned, more darker than usual. She was maybe around Angela Bassett's color or better. Let's make it fair in that sense, right? Let's say she was a black woman. And you were absolutely correct that that white people whitewashed that. I mean, they whitewashed that entire thing. And Cleopatra just was not fully a Greek woman. Even if she were a so-called black woman, as a lot of you, some of you believe, how does she relate to you? I'm not trying to be funny, so I'll ask that again. If she is of Nubian descent and she was a black woman, as you all like to purport, she was darker skinned, how does she relate to you by being of darker skin or by being of Nubian descent? Given that African Americans specifically, and Jada Pinkett Smith is an African American, she's a descendant of a slave. So if that is the case, how does she relate to you when you don't have a personal, historical, and ancestral connection to Egypt? You were not born in Egypt. Your ancestors were not born in Egypt. And as far as we can garner about slavery, the majority of Africans that were taken from certain populations was not in Egypt. It was in West Africa, West Sub-Saharan African countries, Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Senegal, Central Congo, anybody? Angola, Mali, Guinea-Bissau, you name it, Ivory Coast, those places which had ports. Where do you get that because someone is dark skinned, that somehow, some way they relate to you? Even in Africa today, Ghanaians don't consider themselves like Nigerians. Nigerians don't consider themselves like Ghanaians. And I have a friend who doesn't even like, who's a Ghanaian, who doesn't even like Nigerians for the simple fact that they come from two different countries. They come from two different tribes. For whatever that reason is, I don't understand it. I don't understand the tribalism because at the end of the day, it's just a different landmass with a different group of people that grew up in a different environment. But you all live on the same continent. I don't understand. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, they don't consider themselves to be the same, in spite of the fact that they're dark skinned. And Nigerians will do the same thing to others. Now, of course, you'll have your exceptions that'll say, well, I love all my African brothers and sisters, regardless of what tribes they come from. And more power to you if you believe in that. But there are some among you who are separatists and they don't consider themselves like every other tribe. So coming back to you, Jada Pinkett Smith, and others like you, if you believe this wholeheartedly, what relevance is it to you whether if Cleopatra was light or dark skin and difference? That's not your history. That's actually the history of the Egyptian people that dwell there, right? It's more of a disservice to them if she was whitewashed, if you will, as opposed to you. It would be more of an effect on you if perhaps you came from a particular African country that was on the western hemisphere of Africa, and they took one of the figures from your culture, your people, your tribe, and they whitewashed them and made them into somebody completely dichotomous from what the people actually look like that dwell in that population. I don't see how, if Cleopatra was a dark-skinned woman, how that benefits you in any way, shape, or form. Seems like to me, when I look at this docu series, it looks like a money grab. Just like most of the rhetoric that pro-black spew. It's about a money grab. You talk about oppression all day long. You keep telling black folks that they're marginalized, they're disadvantaged, white people have more than they do. You keep them jealous all day fucking long, to the point to where black people are not even trying to get out of their circumstance, and they use it as a crutch to get handouts from other races. That's what I see. I don't see how this particular series benefited you by sitting there historically redefining what another culture's figure looks like. It is not because of white supremacy as to why your Netflix series flopped. It flopped because you were wrong. It flopped because you lied. And it flopped because you were not honest enough to come out and say, you know what? This is wrong. This is not what Cleopatra looked like. And I was taking from these people their figure and making it into my own. And you know what's so funny? And I'm going to reiterate this. I said this a long time ago. None of you would know this because I didn't direct this at you. But this was in a video from another time. But I always have had this notion. The people that spew about racism, white supremacy, oppression, and all of that, whether if you're white or black, you do it not because you actually care about the ancestors that actually experienced true racism back in the day, but you do it because it's a cash cow. It's a money grab. It's always been a monetary thing. For some people, it's about educating the masses. For the most part, it's for those who can't find any other way to make money. So they make money by exploiting your emotional insecurities about how you look, how you view and look at other races in comparison to yourself. Because in the end, all I hear all day long is a bunch of jealous rhetoric coming from one race and spewing it on another because of what happened to them 200, 300, 400 years ago. That's all I hear. And not to say that what happened back then wasn't a horrible thing. It was absolutely horrible. I don't agree with it. And if you want to talk about reparations, reparations should have happened after our ancestors was manumitted out of slavery in 1865 on up, about maybe a generation or two ahead of them. They should have gotten that effective immediately after that happened. Right now, no, not really. And if you did get it, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to sell it back to the same people that gave it to you? Are you going to actually take it and do something with it and create something better? Or like they studied us back in the early 1900s, when they said that black folks were more so consumers than they were producers. Are we just going to go and buy all of this entertainment, all this vanity that's out here now, like with these rings, the purses, the bags, all of that stuff? Are we just going to buy things that, well, guess what? Guess who owns those things that white people have created? Are we just giving it back to them? What are we really using these reparations for? And how does that really help us get rid of racism because you get reparations? That doesn't change anything. I would agree with you that at some point, black people did deserve reparations. But you know who it should have came from? Shouldn't have came from white people, just white people at that, the ones who actually practiced it. It should have came from those who initiated the slave trade. Your own people, the ones you will never go to and say, y'all owe us reparations. You'll never do it. You will never go to Ghana. You will never go to Nigeria. You will never go to Central Congo or Angola. You will not go to any of these places, and you will never tell the African that they need to hand you over reparations for selling your ancestors, our grandparents, over here to these Europeans. You will never do it. I have never seen it. If some of you have, more power to you. I haven't seen it. But I've seen more so people getting money off of talking about oppression, off of making black people believe that they're just oppressed and they can't get above their circumstances because they're under a system of oppression. That's all I hear. And some of those same people that sit here and support that narrative, They give y'all all the money. And y'all are the ones that go off and live your life amongst, guess who? Oppressors. You go to the whitest of areas. Patrice Cullors, anyone? Some of these news anchors. They're not amongst black folks. They're amongst white people. And this docuseries really isn't helping black people get their history back. Maybe we should talk more about the figures we do have already that are in Africa that we don't want to often discuss. There are figures in West Africa we can talk about, figures in Central Africa that many of us come from that we may not want to acknowledge, but we certainly come from those places. Why do we have to go all the way to North Africa to somehow talk about how our history was brainwashed? We can start right at that corner of Africa, the one that we came from. Not Egypt. Why Egypt? But, it's ridiculous to say white supremacy had something to do with your show flopping. Ma'am, you sound no different than Viola Davis, who said that if you don't support her show, then you don't support black people. All because she wanted to shame people for not looking at her show for what it was that it was promoting representation. And in the reality, it was historically inaccurate. Giving the Dahomey tribe some kind of one up because they were going against the Europeans when they were the main ones that was mistreating black people. They sold black people into slavery and used it for monetary gain for quite some time and kept it going. And Africa, after the fact, still kept slavery going, even to this day. And I don't hear anybody sitting up here talking about how wrong it is. But the reality is what it sounds like to me. The docuseries was a cash cow. It wasn't to be historically accurate. It was a cash cow. It was to get money. Another way to get money off of people who are emotionally inclined to just listen to anything that you say because you throw it out there and because somehow your knowledge supersedes everyone else. And if you don't do or watch what I bring out, you're the oppressor. You're the bad guy. There's no white supremacy in that, because you know what? Who else also gave you bad approval ratings? Other black people. But, I forgot, we perpetuate white supremacy too. Black people that actually disagree with you. Very interesting. But not the person who's purporting oppression, and none of that money goes back to the actual community. It just goes to you. So you can go right back to the whitest of neighborhoods and live in places where your oppressors live. And you can continue to talk about how you're oppressed amongst oppressors that you chose to live by. But I digress. We'll leave it right there. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Malik Washington, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have a good day or good night wherever you reside, and I thank you for listening if you got this far. Stay tuned until the next episode. With this, I say peace. Everyone have a good one.